I think in some ways this is probably like a new normal for container shipping. Obviously, every time we get this disruption, as we've been discussing, rates go up, profits go up. Let's have a little look at what this means operationally. Again, if you're watching on YouTube or Spotify, you can see this animated on screen now. Global on-time carrier performance fell for the second month running in July, down 4 points to just 33%, according to Xeneta. So just to clarify, a vessel call is on time if it arrives within plus or minus 24 hours of its pro forma berth arrival date and time. Basically, we had a big slump in on-time arrivals in February. That's when the war broke out in the Middle East at the end of that month. Then there was a recovery through spring into May. We hit peak performance of 39% on-time services then. And then since that point, things have been sliding. Average delays have sort of moved the same way, but it's inverted, of course. So they've gone from 3.5 to 4.2 days. Essentially, more vessels running late and delays compounding. Just a quick look by carrier. The spread between the best and worst performing carriers widened again in July from 44 percentage points in June to 49 again, according to Xeneta. Every carrier in the rankings except Zim declined between 2 and 13 points, with HMM the sharpest faller, down 13 points to 14% on time. Maersk still leads the table, but slips slightly to 57%. Gemini partner Hapag-Lloyd second place, then CMA CGM. Wanhai sits at the bottom, 8% on time, and an average delay of a painful 7.3 days. So, Mark, how important is reliability for you? Is it one of those metrics that actually drives carrier selection, or does price still win when it's close? And maybe you feel slightly different about this year because of what's happened this year. And do those numbers feel right to you? I mean, there are different ways of calculating this. Sea Intelligence use a different metric than Xeneta. I don't want to get into the mechanics here, but does this all match up what you're seeing?
Yeah, those numbers definitely sound right. That makes sense. On-time delivery and all aspects of logistics really depends on how you measure, which you've alluded to. And if you don't include blank sailings, then there's another week in many cases that you can throw into the mix. And if you're not in the high 90s%, which maybe will never be, you can't expect to see a lot of volume moving, especially from air freight to ocean freight, which I think is a big opportunity. We can't move that stuff unless we get into the high 90s% from air to ocean, because we need reliability. So the difference between somebody who's 90-ish% and 70%, it makes no difference. You can't count on 90%. There's that 10% gap could be killer for a customer. So at that point, they're all kind of the same, and cost ends up winning the day. I don't think we'd pay more to be 10% more on time if we're still 10% late.
Yeah, I get your point. Okay, so Gemini cooperation. This is the Maersk Hapag-Lloyd combination. Their big selling point was they'd promised over 90% on time arrival. Now Xeneta's calculation, they haven't hit that, but it's semantics really. They were, according to Xeneta, they were mid-60s through Q2. Sea Intelligence has them on target. Is what Gemini's doing here actually what shippers want then, Mark, or is it a numbers game? It seems to be the latter for you, based on what you've just told me.
I think so. I mean, it's nice. It is better to be, I mean, in a way, it's better to be 90% on time than 80 or 70%. But still, that 10% is killer. And I don't think until we get into the high 90s, we wouldn't call it reliable.
Nils, do carriers, do they fixate on these numbers? Maybe some of them do, but as we've just heard there, but or is some of this just about marketing, or do you see it as a competitive advantage? How would a Linus executive look at this?
Yeah, Mike, you're always too tough on the Kaios on this one. But no, actually, Kaios do care. And I spend a bigger part of my life to have those discussions about what's the performance of the products and how to improve and what are the trade-offs and why are we not taking those trade-offs internally, etc., etc. So believe me when I say that they care. Even if you don't want to believe me, there is just a very logical mechanism to have, is that a ship that is 7 days late is a ship that you don't have. It's a week that you don't have a ship departing. And in current markets, of course, carriers are doing everything they can to have the ships coming, at least, be there to load cargo, and they are deploying extra means. So just for the sake of turn time of the assets and being able to load the volumes and gain market share, of course they care. Now, I think that's really
Single figures on time arrivals though. I mean, really, can you imagine if you were only turned up on time 10% of
yeah, yeah.
yeah, you know what I mean?
Yeah, no, definitely. But again, that's why, when you look at ports in isolation and you make the sum up of that, as we are discussing the calculations here to be, of course, it's a disgusting number. The question is, if they didn't have done this extra speeding or this port omission, or maybe even a blank sailing on a service to have the ship repositioned on another service, then what would have happened? They would have had ships doing less turn, meaning customers less served, a fewer number of customers served, if you prefer, and less volume loaded. So even though you could say, 10 or 20% or even 8% seems ugly as hair, yeah, but it could have been worse. It can't be negative, I give it to you, but it could have been worse because ships could have not come back as early as they did in a way and enable a customer afterwards.